Hi, students. Really happy to be here in conversation with Sebastian Kiguel, who's a senior research associate at the Illinois Workforce Educate and Education Research Collaborative, or IWERC. So, Sebastian, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and share what I can with everyone here.
Yeah. And so just start by asking you about like what your current role is. What does it mean to be a senior research associate? And what does that entail? And how did you get into that role?
Okay. So I'll start with what the role is. I am mainly a researcher who works on Illinois statewide issues that we have interest from the state and or stakeholders to research. We are a research practice partnership. So like unlike say, university research, uh, we really well some university research does this too, but we work in partnership with local organizations to sort of co-develop research that everyone, that stakeholders, the state, districts, and us all kind of agree upon. And we try to do this often with the goal of informing current policy debates or current policies or programs that are recently being implemented. So my job basically is managing a handful of research projects. Right now I'm on like four or five. And you have different roles, right? And some I have to do everything from cleaning the data to doing the analysis in Stata or R or whatever, and then writing a report. In others, I might just be supervising the methods or contributing with a piece. I'm mostly a quantitative research, but sometimes I do interviews and
Mm.
qualitative things to help other team members, and so there's a lot of collaboration across projects in the team. So then I'll get to your question of how I got here. Um, so I studied history in my undergrad in
Mm.
Argentina. I was about 22 when I graduated, and I got a job teaching. So I was a high school teacher for a couple of
In
years
Argentina, was
in
it? Oh,
Argentina.
wow. I
Yeah.
didn't know this part of you.
Yeah. And I was also sort of part of a small group of recent graduates who started a popular baccalaureate, which is kind of like an alternative education system in Argentina, in Latin America, based on like Paulo Freire's
Hmm.
Pedagogies of the Oppressed. And we started a high school mostly for trans identifying people, trans
Hmm.
women who were mostly, like sex workers and marginalized. And just like seeing the impact that that school had and the value that getting help from the government had for us and for our students was just huge. So I wanted to get into policy and do
Mm.
bigger things. Um, so then I went to New York. I got my master's in public administration at Columbia. And then that was kind of when I got introduced to statistics and quantitative methods for program evaluation. And I really liked that. I was like, wow, we have all these ideological debates, but if we can just bring it down to an empirical question, we can test it and find out what works. So that inspired me to pursue a PhD. I came to Northwestern. Um, I got my PhD. I learned so much. I had so much good mentorship from my advisor and my committee. I got to work on lots of different research projects. I learned really cool quantitative methods. And then, between going to conferences and hearing from colleagues who'd been collaborating with IWERC, I heard about IWERC. And I was really excited to work sort of after living in Illinois for 6 years. I started to know and care and understand the context. I'd done work with another local organization, the Chicago Consortium for School Research. Um, And eventually that just brought me here. And I've been working at IWERC for 2.5 years, and I'm so happy.
Yeah, and iWork has really had a great reputation in the research practice partnership community, especially at the state level, which you don't see a lot of. And so really kudos to all the work that you and your team has been doing. Now, of course, the work that happens in your teams is really because of the skills that you're able to bring. And the students that I have are really trying to cultivate some of those skills. So Sebastian, for people working in roles like yours, what are key skills that you think, professional and technical, that you think are necessary?
Okay. So I think on the technical end, research is really important. You don't necessarily have to have the most sophisticated quantitative or qualitative skills to be in the sector, but it definitely helps. We have qualitative researchers and we have quantitative researchers and people who do a little bit of both. I'd say everyone has a PhD and, like a certain degree of experience conducting
Mhm.
research. Some people, with quantitative methods, depending on the research question, it'll be staffed accordingly. So I think having methodological expertise is important. Some methods can be very simple and descriptive. Some questions require, complicated methods of causal inference, which is kind of my specialty. So I think rigorous research methods are a very important skill, be it quant or qual. And then subject matter expertise is really
Mm.
useful, but it's one of those things that you learn, right? Like I really focused more on high school in my PhD, and now here I'm working more in early childhood and even doing some post secondary. So those are things you can also just kind of learn and pick up on the job. I'm also learning new methods every day. In terms of professional skills, one of the most important things I think is just having good communication, knowing how to, talk to stakeholders, how to be good at listening and
Mhm.
understanding what it is that people want and need. And, sometimes there's conflict. Sometimes your stakeholders want one thing and you have to tell them, hey, look, I can't do that. Or, hey, look, this program doesn't look like it's working. And so you have to be able to communicate sometimes difficult messages. Um, but I think just like communication is really important in this field because often research is done really well, but if it's not communicated well, it
Mm.
doesn't have the impact you want. It can alienate people. It can just be too complicated and the message gets garbled. So, communicating well, being easy to understand and interpret, and just knowing how to manage conflict, I think are really important.
Yeah. I like what you said too earlier about, yes, the importance of research skills, which my students are gaining as they're taking on more courses, but also the importance of subject matter expertise. Because, like,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people think, oh, I know how to run a regression and I know all of these fancy stuff, but knowing the subject matter and even knowing the context, you were mentioning earlier that you now know the Illinois context and so on, really complements this necessity to have like research skills. I think this is, I want to underscore that. And maybe can you share more about like how have you found knowing subject matter and context? Because you're also coming in from a different country, right? Like Argentina. Like, how does contextual knowledge and subject matter knowledge really matter for the work we do in education and social impact?
Yeah. So I think the first thing you have to remember is any sort of problem that you're gonna uh, sort of address using data and data analysis, chances are lots of people have tried to do something similar before you. So just learning about, what others have done can be really helpful, right? Like if you just took the population of, you know, kindergartners in Illinois and compared those who went to pre-K to those who didn't, maybe you'd think that there was, you ran a regression, you might get some finding, but you need to understand the context. What are these pre-K programs doing? What do they look like? Who accesses them? Are the kids who go to pre-K different from those who don't? What is the counterfactual? If they don't go to public pre-K, where are they going? Are they staying home? Are they going somewhere private? You might not kind of have all these questions in your head if you haven't, read up on all of the different policies and all the different research designs that have been done before you, right? So it's really important to know the context from a research perspective, but
Mhm.
also it's important to know the policy context, right? Like, why are we interested in this question? Who is asking it? I think it's you just learn so much about the policy context talking to people.
Mm.
They tell you, what the problems they're having are, and
Mm.
so many things that if you just approach the data from up above, as an objective researcher, if you don't go in there and talk to people and just like figure out what's happening inside the schools or inside the different organizations, you're probably going to miss out on a lot.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think there's like research expertise, there's subject matter, and then there's like policy on the ground, getting to know how things work in reality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you'd miss otherwise.
Yeah, and I hope that my students uh, take on that lesson. That it's not just the technical expertise that you learn from UC Berkeley, it's also about like knowing what it is that people are actually interested in, because those are the questions that you're being asked to answer. Uh, and sometimes that's not explicit. That comes from the conversation that you're talking about. Now, I think this is a great segue to us talking about like a report that you had on the trends in the kindergarten individual development survey. So I'm really interested in maybe you going through the report with us and maybe sharing like how did it start, what sorts of maybe even um, quantitative methods did you use, slash visualization, slash anything else that you think are skills necessary in the creating of a report like this?
Yeah, for sure. Happily. Would you like me to share my screen and I
Yes,
can?
please.
Okay. So I will navigate to the IWERC website. And this is kind of the specific site for the kids study. So I've been working for a couple of years now on a series on the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey, which is a kindergarten readiness survey taken by all students in all kindergarteners in Illinois. The first report we did just kind of documented like trends in readiness over time between different groups, looked at, like one issue that maybe from a research perspective wasn't, didn't really seem that interesting was like how are ELs being evaluated, but it turns out there's like an alternative scale for ELs, and people in the district really wanted to know if teachers were using that alternative measure or if they were just kind of forgetting it. And it turned out that a lot of them were. And so sometimes just like reporting a very simple descriptive finding
Mhm.
can have a huge impact on policy and lead to changes. Um, so I'd like
And
to walk you
can
through.
I
Oh,
just
go ahead.
underscore that for the students, right? Because sometimes the students want like all sorts of fancy causal inference and so on, but you're
Yeah.
saying that, hey, it's just this simple, and it can only be like even one statistic that's simple
Mhm.
and really capture something, and changes can happen because of that one thing that you were able to point at or discover, right?
Yeah. So like I feel like in my in my PhD training, a lot of emphasis was put on, developing complicated causal methods to identify these like really interesting questions that had never been answered before using very sophisticated methods. And sometimes here, it's like the simplest method, just saying, hey, 80% of teachers are not using the right assessment. Maybe we need to make the assessment easier to find, or maybe we need to remind them, and these are small things that can have a big impact,
Mm-hmm.
um, that statistically are not complicated, but it takes a lot of work to, you know, gather the feedback, listen, hear everyone, hear what their questions are, and, be humble enough to approach it with an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start maybe by showing you the summary of the report. Often our reports have like a one pager or a two pager. Um, so this is the second report in the series. And what we were trying to show was whether this new kindergarten readiness assessment is predictive of students' later scores. So essentially, does being kindergarten ready
Mm.
using this measure predict anything in the future?
Do you
And
mind if
what we
we
found,
zoom it in a bit? Because some students will watch this on YouTube,
of
and might
course.
be too. Okay, perfect.
Um, so, we said children are entering kindergarten with different skills based on, different prior experiences. And we want to know, what's happening between kindergarten and grade three, because until this kids assessment showed up, we didn't know much about what happened before grade three when mandatory state testing
Mm-hmm.
happens. So this allowed us to kind of look at growth and change between kindergarten and grade three. So first, we wanted to know whether kids predicted grade three test scores, and we turns out that it does. Kids who are kindergarten ready at the start of kindergarten are twice as likely to be proficient in grade three. And
Mm.
teachers can use the information that they get from kindergarten readiness to sort of tailor their instruction to meet students where they are developmentally. The other thing that we found, which was less optimistic, was well, kindergarten readiness is great, but it varies between student groups. Black and Latino students not only had lower rates of kindergarten readiness, but even students who scored similarly on kids who were similarly ready in kindergarten had diverging paths in grade three. So, for example, if we divided our students into quintiles based on their kids' math scores, so this fifth quintile would be the top scoring math students in kindergarten, and this bottom one would be sort of the lowest scoring. And we divide it by race, and then we show what is the likelihood of being proficient in grade three. And so we see among the top scoring students, in kindergarten, 65% of white students go on to be proficient, compared to 23% of Black students and 40% of Latina students. And so that kind of leads us to the question of, well, what's happening? These kids are coming in similar, and between grades three and between kindergarten and grade three, the disparities are growing wider.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so then our next reports go into see what might be causing that. And so we look at the role of early childhood, we look at the role of K, elementary school quality. We do some right now. I'm working on some like value added models
Mm-hmm.
to see whether are white students more likely to attend schools with higher value added than Black and Latino students. Like how are we to what can we attribute these growing
Mm-hmm.
disparities? And everything's kind of pointing to school quality, though that is still preliminary.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
This is great. I want to just emphasize this like graphic you have, which is you can say is simple, but
mhm,
it's compelling. Like you have everything in this one graphic, and this is again a skill, right? That
mhm,
students are able to learn and practice. when as you learn more about the data, as you learn more about like what essentially is the story that needs to be communicated here.
Exactly. I think, you can use very sophisticated research methods, but if you don't know how to communicate it, if you're
Mm-hmm.
not able to get your point across to a broad audience, well, then the impact might be limited.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to not show a regression table, right? Because policymakers don't know what to do with that. But if you show a graph like this, sometimes there's a clearer takeaway for them.
Yeah. How about maybe the full report or which report might be something that you can share with us so that it gives students a glimpse of what is a full report gonna look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will open the full report, and I'm sure you'll provide students with a link
Yes.
so that they can access it too if they like. Um,
I'm
so
actually gonna
we'll have
require them to read it.
um, so as you can see, this was a collaboration. This report with two team members and Meg, who's kind of our leader, fearless leader. And so we started with an executive summary of just kind of the main findings with three key takeaways. We try to keep them simple and digestible.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, the report format is not that different from an academic paper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just more descriptive. We also kind of include some like general discussions about equity because we think it's really important to frame this properly. We don't want, policymakers misinterpreting our findings when we're looking at, disparities between racial ethnic groups. I think it's really important to clarify why we're doing that, with what intention, who asked us to. So, we draw distributions of like kid scores.
Oh, so this is like a histogram in a way. This
Yeah,
is what this
yeah. So
is?
this is a
Okay.
density plot or a
Yeah.
histogram of kid scores and grade 3 scores by race ethnicity so that you can kind of see
Hmm.
how those disparities are kind of spreading out a bit more over time. Um, this is a graph kind of comparing the magnitude of disparities in standard deviations between different groups in kindergarten and then grade 3.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, and it shows here, at least on that first graph, that it's increased because that's from kindergarten comparing it to grade three, right?
yeah.
Oh,
And so,
wow.
obviously there's caveats and there's limitations because, the kindergarten assessment and the grade 3 assessment are different. So
Mm.
maybe grade 3 is better able to differentiate on skills. But I think an important piece of this is painting a picture or uh, by presenting lots of different pieces of evidence, right? So we
Yeah.
show those growing disparities. Then we look at the relationship between kids in grade 3 overall. We do those quintiles that I showed you
Mm-hmm.
earlier. We break down those quintiles by race ethnicity, and we show it in many ways so that, like, the nerds and the policy wonks can look at the more sophisticated regression lines and others can just focus on this type of figure,
Mm-hmm.
which sometimes we simplify even more to just say like kindergarten ready versus not, grade 3 proficient versus not. We need many different kinds of ways of describing relationships so that different stakeholders and different audiences can understand it and take away the things that we're hoping that they take away.
Yeah. And really, thanks for this idea of like showing like a preponderance of data
Mm-hmm.
and where it's at. The other thing I wanted to note in this report that you're sharing with us is that you have like study finding one, study finding two,
Mm-hmm.
study finding three, like, and it's all bold at the very top. so that people aren't like looking out for what it is that you want to say here, right?
Yeah.
And
We,
that
we
I
try to
think is
make it
good.
very digestible.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been so um just enlightening about the work at iWork and also the work that you're doing. And I guess if any last words for individuals or students who are interested in working in a research practice partnership, and this is more like students who have an MA, who don't have a PhD yet, like what any words of advice, encouragement for the students?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'd say if you're interested in this kind of work, there's kind of two paths. If you have a master's degree, I think there's very much a place for you. I have seen people in this kinds of organizations with a master's who come in, um, work maybe as research assistants at first, and then slowly develop their own research portfolio. You might spend more time, with community engagement or presenting in outward facing roles or even managing some researchers. There's a lot you can do with an MA. And then, of course, the other option is to pursue a PhD, which can be a complicated path, right? Maybe you go somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
you're a research assistant for a year, you like it, you want to get a PhD, so you go off and do that. And then maybe you'll return in a more senior research role.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, there is space for people without PhDs here. I think it's important to have good communication skills, good management skills, and just know how to understand research, know how to understand data and communicate it in a way that's digestible to people. So, yeah, I think there's tons to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Sebastian. I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone, and thanks to my students.